Welcome to Blood Flow, where creativity meets science. I'm Jonathan Hamill, a doctor specialized in blood circulation and a novelist from Paris. On this podcast, through conversations with world class experts in the domains of science and art, we will explore the hidden links between the pulse of life and the rhythm of creativity. My guest today is Tom Donald. Tom is an Australian born composer and pianist. As a composer, he has worked on multiple award winning movies, including Tangled in Blue and Leaving Baghdad, which won Best Independent Film at the Raindance Festival. As a performer, he's played in iconic venues, including Abbey Road Studios in London, BBC Radio Centre, The Shard, Ronnie Scott's, and the Dubai Film Festival. Tom is also a passionate music educator, and in 2011, he established the London Contemporary School of Piano. The school has now taught over 500 students from over 20 different countries. In 2017, Tom co-founded the Citizens of the World Corps. The Corps consists of refugees and wider community members with a mission to bring peaceful discourse in polarizing times. Since its beginning, the Corps has notably performed alongside Sting at the Shakespeare Globe. His latest album, Pax Eterna, marks a groundbreaking collaboration between Tom at the piano and the Benedictine monks of Pluscarden Abbey in Scotland, and we'll talk a little bit about this in a few seconds. Tom, welcome to the show.
Hi, Jonathan. Thanks for having me.
My pleasure. So let's talk about this new album, Pax Eterna, and the Gregorian monks that sing on it. What are the origins of, and what would be a good definition of Gregorian chant?
Gregorian chant is really the very start of it all when it comes to Western music in so many ways. It originated in monasteries around Europe, which have been back in those days. We're talking just a couple of hundred years AD, really. We're talking about, a society where there was folk music, secular music, but the other music would have been vocal music in monasteries and churches. And this chant started out as a way of reading biblical texts, probably in a slightly more interesting way, with music and the power of music, utilizing the power of music. And over a few centuries, many centuries, sometimes up to 400 years, 500 years, it became clear that it might have started with one monk or musician hearing something in another monastery and going, "That's not how that song goes. I think it should go like this." And very slowly then the origins of written music notation emerged, very, very different to the notation we have today. And that very early notation, based on that very, very early form of singing scales, something we take for granted because on all of our modern instruments, scales are just right in front of us. These instruments didn't exist in those times. There was no piano. There was no guitar. So these are the very, very origins, the DNA, you could say, of Western music. And that in many ways is what Gregorian chant is. I don't think it's many other things. It's a spiritual thing to many people, but I don't think it gets the recognition in a sense that it deserves for being the start of a very, very important narrative, which is our music that we listen to every day and enjoy.
Yeah, and it goes back, I think, to Pope Gregory the First. So, do you know a little bit about his life and how he is credited for codifying what came to be known as Gregorian chant and Gregorian music?
Yes, and the particular monks I was working with in Pluscarden Abbey. So Pluscarden Abbey is a 12th century monastery. It's still used for its original purpose. It has survived a series of reformations and history within Scotland, much history, some of it quite violent. It survived all of that. But the monks at Pluscarden Abbey follow a practice known as the 6th century rule of Benedict. And it is a particular format of singing Gregorian chants that involves singing 7 times a day, around about 5 hours a day of singing, starting at 4:30 a.m. in the morning.
Wow.
This is a 6th century practice that these monks are still practicing today in the 21st century. And it is the mission, also I wouldn't say mission might not be the right word. I would say it's their purpose is to follow this practice in Latin, in original Latin, not singing in English. And I mean, this was a history that was not even particularly well known to myself. I, like most musicians, conservatoire-trained musicians, I think we pretty much learned that music started with J.S. Bach in the Baroque period. Yeah, the 1722 Well-Tempered Clavier book that Bach wrote, where the keyboard is in every major and minor key. But that had to come from something. And I mean, that's almost like, actually, that's the start of modern music. It's not really the start of old music or classical music. If you look, I think that's what going back further in time has really confirms to me, that 1722 Bach's Well-Tempered Clavier is not the start of old classical music. It's the start of modern music. I mean, if I was to play you the first piece from that, play it just out in chords, you know. I mean, I could be listening to a piece of 20th century jazz. It's modern music. So, yeah, I mean, these practices dating back all this time is really the very start of all of that in terms of Western
So
music.
is this practice of following the rule of Saint Benedict well practiced today, or is it very limited to the monks of Closkar Abbey and maybe some other abbeys?
Yeah, it's extremely limited. When we first came up with the idea to do this project, me and Beck Donaldson, who's an incredible producer, and she just makes things happen. I mean, at first we thought, well, really, for this to work, for me to play jazz piano on top of alongside improvised piano alongside Gregorian chant, we'd probably need just to find a choir that can do it, academics that have studied this music. Then it occurred to us very quickly that really what we were after was something as authentic as possible, and then the search began. And so not only finding a community that practices to the rule of Benedict, the 6th century rule, is very difficult. It's actually just very difficult to find a monastery that's singing Gregorian chant in Latin with enough singers, regularly enough for it to be recorded. Now, they're there throughout Europe, not very many in the UK, let alone this 6-7 times a day, according to the rule of Benedict. That is, yeah, I could probably count it with one hand. But these are not communities that are entrenched in modern life. So you're not. There might be more, but you're not going to necessarily. You can't just Google it. Let's just say that.
Okay. So I want to come back to the beginning. What your classically trained, also jazz pianist, improviser. How the idea of recording this album come in the beginning, before looking for and finding Bagdad and Abbey?
Yeah, well, I've had a very varied musical career. I've always been interested in exploring where the piano can go, into settings where the piano is not naturally always there. I think that's what really, for instance, attracted me to writing films, Middle Eastern films, film scores, and using the piano. I think the piano has incredible flexibility. It can do so many things when it's pushed outside what it's used to doing. So that, I mean, my relationship with the piano is very much what can I try and do with this instrument that I haven't done before. In a sense, that doesn't make me a very good classical pianist, because classical piano is very procedural, and you really need to play the same thing, very similar things every day for a very, very long period of time. So in a sense, I'm more of a composer and an improviser, though I had years of classical training. This particular project, in my mind, probably started in 2008 when I came across a vinyl of Gregorian Chant and at a charity store in South London, and I just bought the record and I took it home and put it on, and I'd learnt a bit about Gregorian Chant. I'd read a little bit about it, but my knowledge was extremely superficial, and I heard the beautiful music, and it just drew me straight to the piano. I just felt like playing along with this record. So I thought, well, I'll click the record button. This is fun, and I played to the first side of the record, and it was joyful. But I had this real sensation when I was playing to this record. It felt like I was moving across centuries of music on the piano, because the piano is the end result of all of this. And so the piano was just sort of jumping indifferently. Next minute I'm playing something 20th century, then I'm keeping it very constrained. And it almost felt like I was in a time machine of some sort, which is piano. It's hard to explain that. That was the feeling I got. And I'm not thinking too much of it. I posted the recordings on SoundCloud. They're well out of copyright, this old vinyl was. And I was shocked, actually, because within months I was getting emails from people all over the world asking me, from priests and pastors in the States, Africa, all over the world, saying, "What's this music? What is this? What are you doing? Like, that's Gregorian Chant and that's jazz piano, and I'm hearing it at the same time. How did you do that? What's going on here?" They were generally that sort of tone, and I almost couldn't answer it because I hadn't really put that much thought into it. And then later, when I met Beck Donaldson, she told me she was using the recording in worship and church services in Cheltenham. She's the musical director of Cheltenham Cathedral. Of Cheltenham Christ Church. She, we then spoke about it, because I knew Beck has been behind so many great festivals, and we spoke about, well, how would this happen? And that was almost like a 4 or 5 year conversation. How would this work? We can't get a choir.
So she was using it in church songs. She took your recording and playing it in church.
Yes, that's right.
Oh, yeah.
And with permission from but we spoke about this for many years, and then around about 2019-20, we decided, let's make this happen. And Beck, that was really a research task, because she had to get all of the knowledge she had of monasteries across the country. And we found many fantastic monasteries that just didn't quite meet what we were looking for. For instance, there just only be 2 or 3 singers, which is not quite enough, I guess, volume for the mighty grand piano. And then, or we found a fantastic monastery that sings Gregorian Chant in English. And after hearing it in English, I didn't feel, there's something about Latin that felt, this is the way it just needs to be done. I can't say I'm a purist, right, because I'm adding jazz piano to this, but it felt like it had to be in Latin. I later learned from the monks at Garden Abbey why they believe it should be sung in Latin, which obviously this is pure opinion, but what they were saying made sense. Latin felt more, probably because it might also just be not knowing the language, but the language felt more at ease with the melodies, more integrated in the melodies. It's the same.
Yeah, I think probably not understanding it. You're right. Probably plays a role in being freer with the music. It's like saying the names of notes. It doesn't mean anything. I mean, it means something, but I'm not sure they know Or maybe they do. They usually speak Latin.
Well, they don't speak to each other in Latin, though they probably could. They all know Latin very well. And apparently you can go up to someone in Italy and have a conversation in Latin. They might not exactly know what you're saying, but they'll be able to figure out a lot of the things you're saying, which is just really fascinating. I mean, you might be saying things like, and I don't speak Latin, but you might be saying things like, "Where's the chariot stop?" instead of "Where's the bus stop?" But someone might be able to figure out what that actually means. Um, uh, so yeah, Latin is also the root of our language, in a sense that the scales are the root of our music. So there's a story of our cultural heritage. But I think English, the problem with a lot of this sacred text in English is English is a very, I mean, languages are like art forms in of themselves. Uh, Italian opera has a particular sound to its melody because of the language. You put it into English, something gets lost. I've seen productions, something gets lost in the music.
Yeah, the
And
accents are not at the same place, and the whole energy of it is not the same.
exactly right. And even I've written some songs. I don't speak French, but I've written some songs to French text before. It completely changed the sound of the music I was writing. And so I think also with these sacred texts in Latin, when it's translated to English, English feels very literal, very precise. Sometimes then at other times like it's speaking in tongues. Latin just is just a completely different fit for this text, and that is the belief of the Benedictine monks, that it's closer to what they regard as the word.
Yeah, and then it also made a sharper contrast with your playing, because we're used to listening to piano with English, not so much with Latin.
That's right. Yes.
And what was your experience of liturgical music before discovering this vinyl? When had you listened to it, or was just all of this constant discovery?
I I had not really spent much time listening to Gregorian chant. The earliest music I probably have encountered before that would have been music from the Renaissance period, which again is that's the bridge to modern music. And liturgical music, I mean, just like so many classically trained musicians, it all started with Bach, and Bach wrote so much liturgical religious music. But I mean, that's the sort of modern day. Um, that's really the arrival of modern music. I mean, music hasn't really become more complex or more. It hasn't developed harmonically outwards too much more since Bach, except perhaps for some experiments in the 20th century, and also the jazz revolution, which is
Sure.
what I refer to. The jazz revolution is music from non-Western cultures, particularly Africa and African American cultures, and blues, linking itself inside Western music theory. But other than that, there hasn't been a huge amount of harmonic development in music since J.S. Bach in so many ways. It is the arrival of the modern day. So yeah, again, my experience of liturgical music, be it classical, secular, or religious, was very much to that starting point.
So once you found the Pluscat and Abbey, what was the process like? Did you so I guess you contacted them and you went to see the Abbey. Who was your main contact over there? Was to have like the equivalent of a conductor, or one of the monks is in charge of the music? How did that work?
Yeah, and so these are things I had no idea how any of these things worked.
Because that's what you have a producer, right?
Well, very fortunately I did, because this would have been something impossible for me to achieve by myself. Beck really spoke to them over a number of years and over the phone, if you could get anyone on the phone. And there's no actual conductor in Gregorian chant. There's a music director who plays a bit of organ occasionally. but he doesn't refer to himself as even as a musical director. But he is often giving his ideas on the music. So really, it was a dialogue that lasted a few years, and then we'd reached a point where we could go down to the Abbey and meet the monks at Plusgarden Abbey. It was really key for us to not have any expectations, to know that it just they might not really be interested in this. They were very hesitant at first, and I completely understand that they're very protective of their culture, their way of life, and it's not just, you can't just ring them up and book them like you're booking a choir and say, yeah, how much, what's your hourly rate? I mean, to them that would be very inappropriate.
They are not on TikTok, right?
Yeah, that's right. Or just like booking a bunch of really good session musicians. That is not really compatible with the culture. So I had to spend time. It was very useful for me to spend time down there observing the services, including the 4:30 a.m. one, which was difficult. I mean, I can't imagine doing that every day. And it was an incredible learning curve for me, and I was really fortunate to build a great relationship with some of the monks. Brother Michael, I've never met anyone who knows as much about pre-17th century music than he does. He knows a lot about 20th century music as well. But just to give you an idea, Jonathan, we talk about music from the 70s, had a certain sound to it. Then the 80s, it has you can pick the sound. He can talk about music from 400 AD, and then 420 AD, and 460 AD, and 500 AD, like we talk about music from the 60s and the 70s. And that, to me, just blew my mind. So we build. I think it's like all relationships. It's about building trust. But I had imposter syndrome. But at this point, I was like, this is not like I'm jamming to a record anymore. This is the real thing. So I think we were both scared at this point, or both parties were a little bit like, my imposter syndrome and their reluctance. But
that's probably a good place to start.
Yeah, it is a good place to start. But over time, after numerous visits, we planned how it would actually work. Getting a piano down there. Could a piano be in the space? Does it interfere? No, there's room for the piano to be here. Okay, so if the sound engineer came down, what would that look like? How would the scheduling was the hardest, because if you're already singing 5 hours a day, not
That's
easy.
Right.
So we had to find pockets in their schedule during a time of the year that was less busy for them. Monks are very busy. They're living off the land. They're making their honey. All the woodwork they do, and the stonework. There's a lot of skill, even just maintaining the abbey. So it's a busy life as a monk. I came to learn. But we found.
Yeah, what does a usual day look like if they get up and they have the first prayer at 4:30?
Yes.
I guess because I guess you followed them for a few days, so you can you walk us through a day?
I did, but it is a very private life. It's not a life where you are conversing with the public. Even a visitor or a friend is not necessarily able to follow you around everywhere, and so they do have their exclusive spaces. They eat, or they even have a little chapel of their own in their own space. But yes, during the singing services, they are public, so any member of the public can go there at any time. You could go there tomorrow and say, well, I just had this podcast. It's really nice to meet you, and you'd be greeted with a smile, and be able to have a conversation. But then there's probably many other tasks they have to do in that given day before the next singing, and the schedule is drawn out. And I mean, they have a website as well. So these monks do have a technology side to them, a modern side to them. They have a live stream some of their offices. Anyone can visit the Plusgarden Abbey website. So they are outward thinking, very outward thinking in that sense. But not outward thinking not in the sense that you'd see a TikTok or Instagram account. They're not in the noise.
Sure. Yeah.
Even a website these days. How do you get people to visit a website? It's there for people that find out about it somehow. There's no marketing campaign behind it, so to speak.
Sure. Yeah.
And so yeah.
And what was the sort of surrounding of the Abbey once you got there? How did like, I guess it's, a lot of nature around. What was your first impression? Did you think, wow, this would be a great place to record an album, or just the acoustics of the place? Was that all things? Those all things you were thinking about?
Well, these are things that definitely the acoustics blew me away. As a musician, I am very interested in that, the sound of a space, and we very quickly realized we needed to have an incredible sound engineer to capture that. Hearing them for the first time, even just imagining what the piano would sound in that space, we're going to need a sound engineer that's got the equivalent of a doctorate in acoustics. I mean, this is where the science comes in, right? They're going to have to know exactly where those microphones need to go and how many of them there will need to be and where exactly they'll need to be and what microphones they'll need to be. And we were very fortunate to get one of the finest sound engineers in Scotland. He had to still travel for 3-4 hours to get to the Abbey. So he stayed with us for 2 days during the recording. And I have to say, he captured it with such precision and authenticity. I mean, when I listen to the record on headphones, I really feel like I'm in the space, which is really, alone, I think sonically it was a huge achievement, which I can't take an ounce of credit for. My job was to sit on the piano and simply just react and improvise to what I was hearing. So it was captured with such an intensity that I think that's really important. As for the geography, I mean, Scotland, I mean, anywhere in the nature of Scotland is always spectacular, and the Pliscarden Abbey does not disappoint in that field at all. We were so lucky to have a wonderful videographer who, Josh Adams. He was working on a project with Elton John actually at the time, and said, "No, Tom, I have to come down and take a couple of days off this project to shoot this, because this is like this. When does this opportunity ever happen?" And so the nature of the area, it's about, Pliscarden is around. It's near the town of Elgin. So Elgin would be about an hour's drive from Inverness. So in a sense, it's relatively accessible.
Yeah, but I'm sure it feels remote.
Yeah, it's fields. There's nothing nearby. Even Elgin's not really nearby. I mean, it's a 20-minute drive to the nearest village, and or a 3-4 hour walk. So, so there's, and even with their battered local accommodation, very limited options to stay around there unless you're perhaps staying in the nearby town. But I wanted to be as close to the site as possible. So it was, it's definitely an incredible sense of retreat and being away from the noise of modern life. You realize what that actually is. It sounds like a cliche, but when you're there, you really appreciate silence, and then silence is paired with beautiful singing.
Yeah. How was the return back to London? Did you take a little while to adapt back to the noise?
It reminds me of a sense of my childhood, because I came from quite a rural part of Australia as a child. I think, it just teaches you to slow down a bit, and you just watch how much these monks get done in a day. Whether it's a stonework project and harvesting some of their local food and singing for 5 hours a day. You realise you don't have to rush around as much, and perhaps it's best to just focus on 1 or 2 tasks every day, and doing that with your best focus and integrity, trying to do everything. I think that's what I realised when I get back to London. Why am I trying to do everything in a day?
Mm.
What does that actually achieve?
Yeah, so we should all try a few days in Pluscat and Abbey, see what happens. So I want to talk about the piano because I suppose there were some pianos closer to Pluscat and Abbey, but I think you had the piano brought from London, right?
Yeah, we wanted a piano that obviously was up to recording an album of the highest sonic quality. I didn't take the conventional choice. I guess the conventional choice would have been choosing a Steinway, which is usually the first choice pianists have when they're recording. But the Steinway is such a big instrument. The sound is just huge, and this is really an intimate chapel, the Abbey, and despite how high the ceilings are and how like a pin dropping in this space is amplified massively. So I chose a beautiful German instrument that, as far as quality is concerned, is every bit as beautifully built as a Steinway. Blüthner. Blüthner are a Leipzig-based firm. They made pianos for Debussy, Mahler, Strauss. They're a legendary piano brand, still operated by the same family. So this is,
Wow.
again, this topic of cultural authenticity is, and I've been interested in Blüthner pianos for many years. I own one myself. It has a much warmer sound than other grand pianos would. It doesn't have that. You ever play on a piano and you play the top notes? The top notes tend to have this ping to it, keyboard here. Sort of that ping sound that we're so used to hearing.
Yeah.
It's a nice sound, but perhaps a little cold. And I wanted something with the maximum warmth. And the Blüthner has a slightly different design where there are sympathetic strings that sit under the main strings on the upper register, which gives and those strings are not struck by the hammer. They just resonate with the strings that are above. So in the upper register of the instrument, there is more warmth, and it's not a piano that you can just sort of bash out big sounding chords on. It's a piano that really requires you to think very, very musically in the way you shape your phrases. It doesn't respond to pyrotechnics very well. I wouldn't play a Blüthner in a rock gig in a stadium.
I see.
It's very intimate. It's very detailed. It's very warm, and I thought it was just going to be perfect for this. Just because the last thing I wanted was the piano to somewhat interfere or even worse, degrade the chanting. I wanted it to be able to sit underneath and within, and sometimes even rise up to the levels of the chant. But I knew I needed that dynamic option. I guess
Interesting. And so how many microphones did you end up using for the piano? And also, did you use microphone for the monks? I suppose they needed them as well.
Yeah, so I mean, for a standard recording, you would use 4 to 6 microphones on a piano, and you would use to capture the Abbey. You probably don't need more than 8. They just have to be very well expertly placed. But the problem is not so much that. So if you're in a standard recording studio, you have things like sound isolation, but we don't. So the piano is going to just get inside of everything. It's going to get inside all of the vocal microphones, and so everything has to be so. You can't edit recordings like this. They're completely uneditable. So the microphones have to be placed so perfectly that the balance will just, no matter what happens in the music, and it's not entirely known what's going to happen in the music because of the improvisation factors. It just has to capture everything so purely and honestly to what happened, because you can't then just go turning up one microphone and turning down another. It's just not going to work like it would in a conventional modern recording studio. In a sense, the technology we are using is ancient technology. It is the acoustics of these abbeys which were designed to to create an incredible feeling with the music. The design of the Abbey and the design of the acoustics was sound engineering. It's the earliest form of sound engineering. Now we have software that emulates that. You record a commercial track, you can put echoes and reverbs on singers just through software. And now with AI, like you can emulate. You can have one instrument in a forest and another instrument in a concert hall, another instrument in an ancient abbey. So this is, in a sense, the earliest form of sound design as well.
Yeah, and so how do you think, as the people listening to the album will have the best listening experience? Is it headphones? No headphones? What do you think?
Yeah, so this is the bear bug of every artist. We want everyone to listen to our music the way we we intended it to be made, and of course the public don't do that. So I'll just say that there are certain scenarios where you'll definitely get a great experience. I think headphones is always a more immersive form of listening, and the album was mastered using spatial audio, Dolby Atmos. So if you use, let's say, Apple Music, it sounds fantastic on headphones on Apple Music, for instance. However, I mean, headphones are a great way of listening, but if you've got good speakers, also that's a great way to listen. And also the time of day. I was selecting the tracks for the album in the morning, and I was just listening to it with my morning coffee. And the monks of Lisgarden Abbey have a lot of other recordings of their a cappella singing. They've got about 5 or 6 albums, which I definitely recommend people to listen to. You can find it on Spotify and all of the streaming platforms, or buy it from their website. And when I heard, so just listening to Gregorian chant in the morning with my morning coffees, to me has become a must way to start the day. So I think time of day. But I've heard some amazing stories, and again, it's best not to impose, I think, too many rules on how people listen to one's music, because you just hear surprises. I found out through our school, actually, the London Contemporary School of Piano, found out that we had a new student in the school that learnt about us from hearing the album in her Taekwondo lessons in San Diego. And so I thought, well, that would work. I guess it would work in a Taekwondo lesson. So I think just hearing the stories of how people have listened to the music for themselves and what they've taken from it has been really interesting and surprising.
Sure. So you mentioned a little bit growing up in Australia. You grew up, I think, in Tamworth, which is known as the country music capital of Australia.
That's right.
So how did that translate in your everyday life? What was your relation to country music? Is that something you studied early on?
Yeah, I have a good knowledge of Australian country music, so that's sort of a niche genre, probably this part of the world. But it's a genre of music I know quite well from my childhood. The Tamworth Country Music Festival, it's a rural Australian town. It's considered a city by Australian standards, but not by world standards. The festival is a couple of weeks in January and late January. It's actually it's just finishing now. And so as a kid, there'd be a couple of weeks of lots of country music, and then life would go back to normal. Like all the tourists would leave. And actually, Tamworth is absolutely so busy in that time of the year. I mean, there are not enough. You can't get a hotel anywhere. I mean, people are camping in the school grounds. The schools are hiring out their spaces to go camp.
Really?
So nationally, it's a massive festival. But then everything goes back to normal, and Tamworth has always had some great musical things going on, some really great teachers. I was so lucky to have a great teacher growing up. There's a lot of musical theatre in Tamworth. Tamworth's got a very old musical theatre history. It goes back many, many years. And other styles of music as well. So, and even during the Tamworth Country Music Festival, there's such a diverse amount of music taking place. I became friends as a kid with some great professionals who, I was just a kid, and I got invited to play. One of my friends, Andrew Claremont, an amazing multi-instrumentalist. He's toured India playing raga music, and then he's won country music awards for his fiddle playing. he'd invite some of his favourite musicians from around the world to play at his supper club, which he runs every year. And as a kid, I'd get invited to it. So I had some amazing opportunities. And all the pianists of the famous country artists, Willie Nelson's pianist would show up, and and yeah, incredible. And I had a gig at a local restaurant when I was a teenager. Sort of was the local. It was a very prestigious restaurant attached to a very good hotel. And during the festival, you'd have all of the record producers from Nashville, dine at the restaurant. A very young Leanne Rimes came in once, and we sang a song together before she was a big, big, big name. I mean, so
Wow. How old were you at the time? Like
14.
16?
I was 14.
14. Wow.
I was very young for that gig. It was for my piano teacher strongly recommended me to the boss, and it was the best learning curve to play to the public who were just having dinner and respond to their feedback like that. It was a fantastic education for my playing.
Yeah, because they're not there for the music; they're there for the food. So you have to
they're there
get
for
their
the food
attention.
for the ambience and the food, and it's a high class restaurant. But they might want to request something because they're having a special evening, and you better know that tune. It's their special evening. If you don't, you better have an alternative. But if they don't just want another table there just doesn't really want that much music, you might have to do it really softly. So this was for a 14-year-old studying music. I mean, definitely a great learning curve for me. I look back at that.
So at that time, you were playing classical and already tunes and going to other sorts of music, not just classical?
Yeah, well, I think playing in a piano bar teaches you to play jazz very well, in a sense that I got the real book, the jazz book, and was like, okay, how do I work through these great standard pieces? And a lot of the jazz standard repertoire are show tunes that you improvise on, and so that was great. As a kid, I loved pop music. I mean, I loved Elton John and Billy Joel as a child. I was obsessed by them. I just was like, oh, God, just the chords, to me were. So I was studying my classical music, but I had such wide musical interests. So playing in a public space like a restaurant was taught me how to bring all these different styles together for different occasions and different audience members. So that was really, really helpful.
And did your teacher help you explore jazz? Because usually teachers are more specialized in classical, or others are specialized in jazz and pop music. Did you find someone who kind of knew all these different styles, or did you have to learn by yourself?
Yeah, well, I was so lucky to have such a great teacher, and my teacher, her name was Jennifer Heaton. She was a New Zealand opera singer. She trained as an opera singer, but she played piano magnificently, and she just happened to live in Tamworth for those years I was there, and she was a bit of a musical polymath, you could say, and in fact that I think she's subconsciously and consciously a huge influence on the London Contemporary School of Piano, which I started many, many years later, because the types of teachers we tend to have in our school are musical polymaths, where we can talk about hip hop and jazz and classical music and Bach and the Beatles all in the same breath, and find universal connections between all these things. That's something we're very interested in, and I think, and also, teaching is not just about your teacher being an expert in these fields, and there's something they might not be an expert in. What my teacher was so good at, and I think the best teachers have this quality, they're so good at teaching their students to teach themselves, to reflect on themselves and say, well, what is it that I need to be working on now? Where is something missing, and how do I go about that task of filling those gaps? Rather than say, this is what you have to do, go home and practice this. Now you have to do this. Now you have to do this. Because there's that sort of engagement is very limited. But when you teach someone to teach themselves, that's very powerful.
So yeah, the London School of Contemporary Music. So you founded that in 2011, correct?
Yeah, so London Contemporary School of Piano. Sorry, it's a mouthful.
Oh, sorry.
All the marketing gurus going to tell me, you've got to change that name. But yeah, that's where the London Contemporary School of Piano. Yeah. Yeah, so we founded that in 2011. The school had pretty much started a little bit before that, but at that point it was really just me trying many new teaching methods on early adopters of some of these teaching methods, and it really started from a frustration to me, actually, of where I felt music education was heading. I was working in a few schools and teaching kids and taking them through the piano exam system in the UK, which is very... You do your grade 1, you learn 3 pieces for that. Then next year you learn another 3 pieces for your grade 2, and then next year you learn another 3 pieces and then by the time you get to grade 4, you give up. It's so boring, and why wouldn't it be boring? I mean, how could that possibly be interesting? and I just felt, when you're in your mid-20s and you think you know everything, I just thought that's a terrible system. And I mean, I still agree with my mid-20s self, but that doesn't mean that an alternative is just easy to find around the corner. And that was the great journey of starting the school. If we're going to say we have better ways of teaching piano, well, what are they? And where can exams be used? Because sometimes people need to take exams for all sorts of purposes. And over the last decade, we have produced many. Well, the first step was, I think, the first thing we do is we look at very holistic ways of learning music, understanding. I mean, I don't know if you've ever played a piano before, Jonathan, but if you're a complete beginner, do you play?
Yeah.
Yeah. But see, this may make immediate sense to you. But if you look at a complete beginner, why don't we teach them the 7 chords that the scale produces, and then say, okay, we know those 7 chords now. The chords 1, 4, and 5 are major chords, and 2, 3, 6 are minor chords, and so on. Let's look at all the music you listen to, and let's recognize these patterns that are in everything. I could be talking about a 12-bar blues or a Mozart piece, and they're both heavily reliant on chords 1, 4, and 5. They're like the pillars of traditional harmony on the piano. And so our style of teaching is very holistically driven, and a lot of kids get up to they do all of their grades, they still don't know these musical golden nuggets. It's like they've just been taught to just obey the composer and not really understand what the composer was saying and feeling, and how the systems that the composer used, just on a more theoretical scientific level, how composers exploit our emotions with certain sounds, and just giving the students some freedom to explore that themselves and be on that level. And so that was the start. But that was just the start. I mean, in recent years, we've been looking more at neurodiversity and how different people learn things in different ways. And that, for music, is a massive rabbit hole, because it affects the music we love to listen to, and maybe the music we don't love to listen to. I can put on a piece of music that deeply moves me, and the next person, they just feel nothing at all. And so how that affects our music education is incredible. So we do a lot of profiling with our students now to find out how we think we can best teach them in a way where there'll be less barriers for them to succeed, and they can just freely...
So you mean also not imposing them a certain piece if they don't respond to it is also part of it?
That's right, or even a certain modus operandi of learning. So are you going to be better suited to... Some people just, taking a theoretical approach to learning is really useful for them. Some people are more driven by their muscle memory, and it's more, let's work on the physical side of playing and feeling the music. And of course, all of these things are really important for everybody. But what angle do we take first in your learning journey, where you're going to really respond to these things? And
to know this, you're basing yourself on experience, or you're also working with a psychologist or a neurologist, or how are you doing this?
So yeah, firstly it was through intuition, and then very quickly I learned you can only go so far with intuition. So now we work Where at the moment we're working with some fantastic education recruitment. I would say recruitment scientists who have a lot of background in the psychology side of things, and the being able to and so the whole school in a sense operates some way on this, even with the recruitment of our teachers, the profiling of the individual and finding a musical role for them that best suits them. So they're not put in a situation where they're learning in a style where there's just going to be too many barriers. It's going to just be, it's like putting the wrong shoes on and you're just stuck. So now we are starting to take that more scientific approach to profiling, measurement, asking the right questions to people, giving really good. I mean, one test we use, and there's so many out there now, but one we use is the Kobe index, which is an American one, and that's a really good way of finding out how people problem solve their way through things. It's not a musical test at all. It's not a test, it's just a questionnaire, really. But then you find out, okay, this is how you tend to problem solve things. And it has different metrics that you can look at these things at. Combining that with musicianship and because some people just want to play to relax and enjoy themselves, so you don't want to get too serious about, or dogmatic actually is the word, about something.
Yeah. What is the distribution of students? Do you have a lot that want to be professional musicians and others that just want to get better but have another regular job?
So we have a lot of people that want to play for their pleasure and enjoyment. Becoming a professional musician is such a niche thing. We do have some professional musicians we train as well, and help their artist development. But that would be a minority of our students, to be probably 5-10%. We have a huge base of adult learners from around the world who are looking to change their relationship with music. So I would say one of our typical demographics are adults that played when they were kids. They got up to grade 4, they gave up, went through that system. They regret giving up. They feel bad that they gave up, feel guilty that they gave up. They want to get back into playing piano again, but they don't want to do anything that they used to do. They want to have some autonomy over what they're playing. And then within that demographic, we have a lot of, I would call, psychographics. I mean, meaning people of different ways of thinking about music, where we are able to solve their problems. So one, for example, we have a lot of adult students, I would say in their 50s and 60s, who are extremely scientific and analytical, almost too analytical, because they want to play music like blues, which blues was invented in whiskey-fueled bars, right? You know, it's very unacademic. Its roots is very unacademic. But they want a structured step-by-step approach to playing the blues, but they have not been able to find anyone, because they've just found jazz musicians to say, yeah, you feel the vibe, man, and that just really just doesn't help them at all. And we are able to meet them in the middle, in the sense that we have found ways of teaching something like the blues in a very systematic, step-by-step way. We start with this task, we move on to that task, and then by the time you're making some improvements learning that way, then it gets to a point where you've got to not see it as just taking single steps, but now it's branches of a tree, and you have lots of options, and your road divides, and today I might go that way through improvisation, or that way, and helping, and then just helping the student who has that very and theory is an interesting thing for a lot of adult learners. They're of that profile. They want to learn more theory. They want to know how everything works. They're probably some of your listeners on your podcast. They want to understand. So I'll play a nice chord. Tom, how does that chord work? I need to know everything about how that chord works. And often the problem with that in music is there's no time when you're actually playing and improvising and creating to understand how everything works. It actually is going to slow you down approaching it like that. Yeah. So we sort of have to divide our time into the understanding of everything versus the doing. A great football player about to kick a goal at a really critical point in a match can't be thinking about the aerodynamics of where their feet are and where they're standing. They'll never kick the goal. So, so that's just an example of one of our demographics of students that we've had a lot of success with. And it's such a pleasure to see it and to unravel it yourself and remember when you were taking the journey, how you learned, and you start to see the music in different ways as well, which is really fascinating.
Yeah, no, I'll put in the links for the school. It seems really fascinating. I'm sure people will find a lot there. So
Well,
can
the
you tell
easiest,
us a little bit? Sorry?
I'll just say one thing. The easiest way to find out anything about us is to go to the London Contemporary School of Piano YouTube channel, because we've got a whole load of classes that are very systematic on there, which people can just enjoy their own time and leisure.
All right, cool. I'll put in the link. So what can you tell us about any upcoming projects? Are you taking the monks on a world tour? What's the
Yeah, but touring is out of the question. Though if a very special opportunity came up, I'm sure we'd be able to have a conversation about that. But at the moment, I am considering what a tour would look like, going through monasteries around the world that practice chant. I'm also interested in perhaps exploring chant from other cultures, non-Western musical cultures, and seeing how I could respond to that. But at the moment, this year really is it's about letting more people know about this music and hear more about it. Perhaps my next album might be more conventional. It might be a solo piano album or a trio album. I'm not entirely sure at this point, but I'm sure the artistic muse will tell me a bit later this year.
All right, keep listening. Well, thank you so much, Tom, for taking the time to be here. It's been super interesting. Once again, your new album is called Pax Eterna, and it's available since December in physical disc and on all digital platforms, with headphones, without headphones, whatever you like. So thank you, everyone, for tuning in. This was Blood Flow.
Thank you.